James asks, I'm sure you have a video on this already, but I haven't stumbled across, but how dangerous is the PI career? And it's not real dangerous, James, but there are some things as a private investigator that you need to be aware of and you need to be cautious of. I think the danger level is really going to be defined by what you do and how you react to different situations. I'm not saying it's not dangerous at all, but for instance, if you're doing surveillance and you're confronted by the subject that you are doing surveillance on or by somebody else, how you react to that is really going to define whether that gets escalated or not. For me, if I'm doing surveillance and somebody confronts me, I've always got a pretext story, and I would rather drive off than have a confrontation right there on the street and potentially have problems, especially if it's the subject. If it's the subject of the surveillance, I need to get out and be done anyway because I shouldn't have contact with them in the first place. My biggest worry has always been more on the process serve side. I've been chased off of more porches. I've had people let their dogs out. I had one situation where a gentleman, it was a difficult serve, and it was a very large property. We knew he was there. I had gone up to the front door. I did what's called service by refusal. And then as I'm walking away, and I was parked about 400 feet away, 400 feet away on the street. I didn't want to park in his driveway. As I'm walking away, he's walking out of the door towards me with his hand on his hip like he's got a weapon. And he's yelling and screaming at me to leave his property, and things like that. Now, I had another private investigator down on the street that was videotaping and kind of had my six there. But that one was a little scary. But obviously, I don't think the guy actually had a gun. But yeah, I think he was just acting like he had a gun. I've had some other situations where I've kind of been like, oh no, what am I doing here? I've had situations where I've been made on a surveillance and they started following me and things like that. But again, keeping your cool is really important. I suppose when you're doing interviews, if you're going into a questionable neighborhood, that could get a little dangerous too. But usually on those cases, if I'm not comfortable going in by myself or it's later at night, it's dark, something like that, I'm usually going to have another investigator as a witness and as a backup for me to go along, because there's some power in numbers. If you're knocking on someone's door and you want to do an interview and there's somebody standing behind you, a big bulky guy, a lot of times that's going to deter anything that comes up. So I don't consider it a highly dangerous profession, but there are some things that you definitely need to keep an eye out for, James. I hope that helps. Our next question is from Tofkas01. No formal training. Isn't a career in law enforcement necessary to become a PI? I'm not from the USA, but I heard that you need in most states at least several years of experience as a policeman or a similar experience in law enforcement. Here in Germany, becoming a private investigator isn't even regulated whatsoever. Every person can do it without any license. Thank you so much for that question, Tofkas. And I'm not 100% sure that name is, excuse me, but I believe it might be referring to a drink or something like that. But we have a couple of things in common, Tofkas. One, you're from Germany. I'm not from Germany, but I did live in Germany for a few years as an army brat, several decades ago, obviously. But I lived in Hanau, Germany. So thank you so much for listening to me there from Germany and checking out my videos. Also, here in Colorado, due to our governor's infinite wisdom a few years ago, he deregulated the PI business. He decided to eliminate licensing for private investigators here for whatever reason, and that's a discussion for another time. We don't need to go into that right now, but we are no longer regulated under licensing here. Obviously, there's other laws about stalking and about different things like that do pertain to different things, that we have to abide by, but there's nothing directly for private investigators. But the question saying no formal training isn't law enforcement experience required, the short answer to that is no, for the most part. I think there's one, and I don't even remember what it is, but I think there's one, maybe it's New Jersey or New York or something like that. But I think there's one state out there that requires law enforcement experience to get your license as a private investigator. Most states that I'm aware of that have licensing do not require law enforcement experience. They do require some level of experience, and that experience may be law enforcement, it may be military, it could be security, it could be process serving, it could be a number of different legal professional areas, or maybe you work as an apprentice investigator under a larger firm or something like that. But the answer is really no, you do not have to have law enforcement experience to be a PI here in the United States, but the licensing is regulated per state. And there are 6 states, Colorado included, that have no licensing, so you don't have to have any experience to be able to be a PI as far as from a legally operating as a professional private investigator. But I would question if you're not licensed somewhere. I'm licensed in other states, in other jurisdictions. I would always question the validity of a private investigator if they don't carry a license. Our next one is from Norman Oman. He says, does it work for numbers overseas? And Norman was watching a video, The Secrets to Obtain Phone Number Information, an OSINT training video that I was making. And Norman, I don't believe any of the databases that I talked about there will work for other countries. I do believe in a lot of countries there are probably some ways to get databases, free databases, excuse me, to get free databases to get phone numbers and stuff, but I don't believe any of the ones that I spoke of. They generally are for the United States here. Most of my videos are going to reference what it is here in the United States. They may have some crossover into other countries, but for your question, Norman, thank you so much for that too. No, I don't believe our database is going to work for those. But sometimes just a simple Google search, so you can go to Google and you can just search for that phone number in quotes, and it's in your normal format of foreign phone numbers. For instance, here in Colorado or here in the United States, generally it's going to be a parentheses, the area code, a parentheses, a space, the first 3 digits, a dash, and the last 4 digits. So if you put all that in quotes, a quote in front and a quote at the end, now you're going to be searching anywhere for that phone number if you're trying to find information for that phone number, that is. But you may be able to find that individual's phone number if you put their name in quotes, quote, Bob Smith, quote, and then quote, parentheses, the area code you think they may live in, another parentheses, and then another quote. Then it's going to look for documents or websites out there that have your person's name and that area code, and then you can start to try to do it that way. But that's another topic for another day, because that goes into some pretty heavy-duty OSINT training there. So our next question from Ireland's Not a Country. Thank you so much for this one. He was watching the video, Don't Be a PI Until You See This. And yes, I still have that same coffee cup. Until you see this, don't be a PI. The pros and cons to becoming a private investigator. And he asks, how much do you charge clients? And that's a tough question to answer, because it really all depends. It depends on the type of case. It depends on certain specifics of the case and things like that. And a lot of times when private investigators are talking about the fees, what they're talking about is their hourly fees. And I always caution private investigators to not just look at hourly fees. Don't even quote hourly fees. My clients never see my hourly fee until they see my contract. What I quote them is a retainer. And I calculate a retainer that's going to get the entire job done. If they want 3 days of surveillance, or 1 day of surveillance, or 4 hours of surveillance, or if it's a criminal investigation, I'm going to get an idea of what it's going to take to initiate that, whether it's 20 hours, 50 hours, whatever, depending on the information the client has provided me. And then I'm going to quote them a retainer fee that's going to get all that done. And that's going to be all inclusive for my hours worked and my mileage and my travel time and report time, if there's video editing time in there and stuff like that too. And if you're wondering how to calculate retainers, I do have a video on the channel. You can just go to my channel and you can search for retainer in my videos and you're going to find one. I have multiple videos actually up on the channel about how to calculate them. And I have on my website, on the official PI Guy website, freeprivateinvestigatortraining.com, I have a retainer calculator that I designed in Excel that you can purchase for not very much money. I have less than 20 bucks on there that you can purchase, and it will tell you all about, you know, all the different levels of retainer that you may charge a client. It's focused a lot on surveillance, but you can use it for other ones too. If you're going to do 3 days of surveillance, 10 days of surveillance, 1 day of surveillance, use 2 investigators, 3 investigators, 1 investigator. And I have a video about how to use that, so you might want to check that out as well. But as far as what do I charge my clients, it kind of all depends. And, you know, I charge a different fee for different types of services, and they're calculated in different ways. The best thing for you to do if you're trying to set your fees is really to shop your competitors and see what they are, you know, charging there. But I always suggest to quote to the client, not an hourly fee, but quote that retainer or the cost for a full fee there. Our next question is from Rod Chestnut. Rod asks, isn't the ability to hold and record with the lawmate in the open at an angle that's not normally an iPhone recording angle the very best feature? And what Rod is talking about, excuse me again, I did a video about this Covert camera. This is the camera right here. It is an iPhone 6 or 7 case. I have an iPhone 6 plugged into it. It's popped in right here. But the phone is not the determining factor for this. You don't need the phone. I can just turn it on and it's going to start recording. The phone adds a lot of features on it. But the camera is right here. Versus on a phone, the camera is going to be, you know, up here in the corner somewhere on one of the corners. But the camera is actually right here. So what he's saying is, isn't one of the best features the fact that I can be sitting and holding this like this and holding it at a normal angle and acting like I'm texting or looking things up and stuff like that. Obviously, it might be a little bit lower, but it would be like that. And you're absolutely right, Rod. That is a much better feature than doing this. And that is one of the biggest features. There's a lot of features in there. And I actually have a video up on my channel too that goes through all the features and how to use this device and things like that. So, but holding it like that, it is keeps you very covert. And you know, as Rod says, perps might not look at somebody twice if they're just holding their phone flat and they're looking at it in their hand. But if you're recording on a normal phone and you're holding it like this, somebody's going to notice. Or usually you want landscapes, so you're going to be walking around like this and you're going to look kind of funny following somebody with your phone like this, or even if you're following them all the time like this, because you have to keep it pretty straight up and down to get everything. Otherwise, you're just going to get their feet or their head. So thank you very much for that question, Rod. And I'm apologizing for my coughs and stuff, folks. Getting over another cold here, if you can imagine that. And then Ozzy Lambeck asks kind of the same about the same product. How much do these devices cost? And he's talking about this, and he was watching a recent video that I just released, why the Lawmate PV IP7W, which is this one, why it outperforms your cell phone. And I went into some of the details about that. But Ozzy's asking, how much do these devices cost? And they do cost a little bit, no doubt about it. There is definitely some cost and there's some expense, and I'll share with you a little bit here. This is off of my website. I do sell these products. I am a Lawmate reseller. Get them drop shipped directly from Lawmate right to you if you're looking to purchase one. But let me share a screen here with you from my website. Again, this is off of freeprivateinvestigatortraining.com, and as you can see, there are multiple ones here. This one that I'm talking about is the top metal. It's the Lawmate PV IP7W. It's a 1080p covert surveillance camera. It takes the iPhone 6 or the iPhone 7. Again, they're not necessary to have that phone in there, but that does add on to some functionality with it. And they run $305, and that is expensive. I understand it. I get it, folks. They do cost quite a bit of money there. But you have to remember when you get any piece of equipment, whether it's a covert camera, whether it's a regular camera, whether it's your surveillance vehicle, whatever, a laptop, a computer, that's an investment. That's an investment in your company, and that's going to enhance the work that you do. There's some other ones that you might take a look at there. In the top left is the PV900 EV03. That one, you don't put a phone in it. It has a working screen right on it. You can connect to it with your phone, so you can control it with other devices like that. But it has a screen right on it that you can control everything. It's the newest version out there. And then that bottom left is the PV-IP45. That one takes an iPhone 4, 4S, 5, or 5S that you can pop in there. It costs a little less. It's $195. It's a little more affordable. I recommend that a lot of times when you get started. It's only 720p, but it's still excellent video out there. And you can buy a used iPhone on eBay for 30, 40, 50 bucks that you can pop in those things, and then you can run them from that. I also carry that middle bottom one, the PV RC200 HDW, which is the key fob one. It's a covert key fob one. So I carry both those two middle ones there in my arsenal of cameras, because I usually try to keep a key or two, a couple keys on my key fob one as well that I take with me, so it looks a little more realistic, but it looks just like a key fob, and I can walk around with that in my hand, set it on a table, things like that. On the bottom right's another key fob one there, and there's a whole lot. This is just 6 of many cameras, covert cameras and things like that I have. So I think I have 9 covert cameras up there, so you want to check it, but I have tons of PI gear on there that you might want to look at. And that top right one is really nice. It is actually a coffee cup lid that you can put on most standard coffee cups. So you can go to your favorite coffee shop on your way out the door to surveillance, and you can get a coffee, and you can put this lid on there, and now you have a camera that you're walking around, and it's staying extremely covert there. So hopefully that answers that question for you, Ozzy. And our next question is from MD Browser. MD asks, can you please make a video about detecting passive RFID? And MD was watching the video, Epic Mobile Surveillance Moments, that I recently had, but this was the question that he had asked there. And I believe he also emailed me, and what he's talking about is the little RFID transmitters, like somebody might stick in to somebody, or something like you might have in a pet or something like that. And I've heard tell with some of those alphabet organizations out there, in certain situations with certain levels of security, people may have these implanted in there. I don't know anything about that. But I do know that if there's something like that in somebody, it's very difficult to find it. I would generally recommend for somebody, if they're looking at something like that and they think they have one on their own body, to talk with their physician first. They're most likely going to be able to, do some x-rays, things like that, to see if you can see it. The problem with trying to locate it with electronics is the human body is full of water. We're just big walking sacks of water. And that makes it difficult for any pieces of equipment like a nonlinear junction detector. We have a very expensive nonlinear junction detector from REI, and what a nonlin does, that's what we call it, a nonlinear junction detector will identify most pieces of electronics, whether they're on, whether they're off, whether they're transmitting, not transmitting, working or not working. Even if they're broken, it's going to do it. But it will not through a human body, because of all of the water that's in the body. It's going to block the ability. Now, there's another thing you have to consider too with a nonlinear junction detector, is it is bursting out a high-powered signal. It's got a high-powered radio frequency signal that it's bursting out, and it's looking for technically it's looking for different frequencies and different resonances that are coming back off of that. I can't go into detail on all of that right now, but because it's sending out this high-powered RF, you do not whoever want to point that at a person. It's dangerous. You don't want to do it. So we would never use something like that on an individual because there's dangers potentially involved in there. And all of the training that we take, they say never point that. If you're scanning something with it, if you're doing a wall or something and somebody walks by, you need to lower it. You need to make sure you don't point that at anybody. But even using something like an advanced near-field detection receiver may not find anything like that because they're not transmitting all the time. They transmit on occasion. It's similar to like an Apple AirTag or a Tile device or even a GPS tracker. They're not transmitting all the time usually. They're sending something out once a minute, once every 5 minutes, once every 10 minutes, whatever, because they're going to give you general locations of something, because they would need a whole lot more battery power if they're transmitting all of the time. So a regular RF detector, even a near field, an expensive one like the Andre from REI, probably isn't going to find it. So I would recommend that you contact your doctor and you talk with them about your suspicions and try to get an x-ray to see if that's in there. And that is going to wrap up all of the questions that I have on my initial list. So now I'm going to try to get over to see if you guys have questions here. So just bear with me if you can. I'm trying to get into the live stream myself. That was one of my problems I had last week, was I had it actually running and it caused a lot of problems there. But I'm not so sure that I can do that. So I'm not sure if you have questions or not posted. So if you do, let me give it another second here while I look for everything. Looks like there are a lot of people out there. I do not see any questions on it right now. So looks like there are some people watching. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end this week's session. I'll be back next Saturday. So join me. I'm going to try to do this every Saturday morning. If you do have questions, you can go into any of my videos and you can post a question there, and I will try to get it on a future one. And that will end this one. And I thank you so much for joining me.